Hi, good morning, and welcome to this webinar. It's great to have the opportunity to talk to everyone today. Apologies for the delayed start. I think there's just a few audio issues that we're trying to resolve for a few people, but I'll begin in just a moment. Perfect. I think I'm going to go ahead and hopefully you can all hear me. If you have any questions during the webinar today, please use the window, the Q&A window. I'll hope to address all of the questions you have at the end. And for any remaining ones, Gary from academia will be able to reach out to you and help you with any of those. So the webinar today, as you can see, hopefully on your screen, is coming from Jamf, and we help organizations succeed with Apple. My name is Nick. I'm the business development engineer at Jamf. I specifically focused on education market, and I covered the whole of the EMEA region. I've been at Jamf for over 4 years. Prior to then, I trained as a teacher of computer science, teaching at secondary level in the southwest of England. Before that, I worked at an app development company, helping to deploy iPads, iPad 2s at the time, within education, within schools. And before that, I worked for Apple. I'm really grateful at Jamf because it gives me the opportunity to combine my passion for teaching and my love of Apple technology and my experience of managing and deploying devices. For those of you unfamiliar with Jamf, we have various products in our product portfolio. Just to give you an impression of what that looks like, hopefully you can see this here. We have Jamf Connect at the top, which acts as a streamlined method for authentication and identity management, specifically for macOS. We have Jamf Now, which is a small, lightweight management tool aimed at the small to medium business market. We have Jamf Pro, which is our flagship management product that we've had for over 18 years now. We have Jamf School, which is our latest offering in device management focused on the education market. And our latest product, Jamf Protect. Behind all of that sits Jamf Nation. Jamf Nation, as you can see, has over 100,000 active members. I think it's the largest online community of Apple administrators. Chances are, if you look for anything online to do with managing Apple devices, whether it's iOS or macOS, your top hit would probably be a Jamf Nation article. You don't have to be a customer to use the services of the community, so I thoroughly encourage everyone to get an account and to have a look at what there is to offer on Jamf Nation. So that's just a quick overview of where we are as a company and what our portfolio looks like. Today, I'm specifically focusing on Jamf School. So Jamf School is a management solution specifically aimed at the education market. You saw we had the other ones there as well, but I'm going to focus squarely on Jamf School today. And when I refer to Jamf School, what is it that I mean? Well, to put it very simply, that's Jamf School. It's a web-based console. You can sign in online. You can see all of the settings and services available. So IT administrators can see all of the iPads, all of the Macs in their environment, in their school, and they can push out applications centrally to them, wirelessly, centrally, and they can manage those devices. This has traditionally been a tool seen for the IT department. And what I'd like to focus today's webinar on is actually how we use MDM, mobile device management, and this IT tool to be able to help empower teachers, parents, and students with Jamf. I'd like to show how MDM can directly help with the pedagogical approach in a classroom. And we do this using 3 iOS applications that we've developed that work hand in hand with the Jamf School management console. And that is the teacher, student, and the parent iOS applications. As I mentioned earlier, device management, MDM, very much traditionally seen as a tool for the IT department, a tool which they would log into in order to configure, set up, and manage those devices on an ongoing basis. What we're trying to do at Jamf is actually take MDM and put it in the hands of the other stakeholders. And that is, as we guessed earlier, the teachers, the parents, and the students. These are the people actually using the devices. They should be able to have a say in what management and MDM solution the IT department are using on their devices to better allow them to actually empower in the classroom a student learning experience. So what I'd like to do is look at each iOS app individually for a moment and talk about some of the features and some of my top features and how they relate to the classroom. I'm going to begin with the teacher application. So Jamf Teacher, as you would imagine, it's an iOS application, as you can see in the example here. It allows you to set and clear restrictions. So on a basic level as a teacher, if I want to, say, remove the camera during this lesson, I'd like the students not to be playing with the camera. I'd like them to be focused and on task. As a teacher, I can then select the iPads and remove the camera temporarily from the devices. Perhaps I'd like to install an application. Perhaps there's an application that's missing from the devices. I'd rather not have to go to IT ahead of time, or perhaps I'm just setting up for a lesson and I've only just noticed. As a teacher, I can load the teacher app and I can install apps on the other devices that are available. And the ability to lock into an app or a set of applications. Inbuilt into iOS is guided access, where on an iOS device you can go into an application and then lock it into that application. And the teacher can do this centrally from the teacher application. In the whole class, they can select an app, or as we'll see, a set of apps to use in that lesson. Another feature we bring with the teacher app is actually instant messaging. So being able to help students. When I was a teacher about 5 years ago, I had a student in my class who had selective mutism. So this is a bit of a rare disorder, but what it meant is he would only speak at home with his mum. He wouldn't speak to anyone outside of the home. So the school solution to this was to give him a small whiteboard and a dry marker pen, and he would have to write out his question and hold it up if he had one. Now, obviously, this wasn't the best lesson and classroom experience for him. He'd have to sit on the front row of every class he was in. He was subject to some bullying in the class as well. And as a teacher, sometimes I often struggled to read his handwriting and would have to ask him to rewrite the question. So all in all, not the best experience for that student. With Jamf Teacher, I have the ability to have a one-on-one conversation with him in the classroom without disturbing the rest of the class, so everyone can stay focused and on task. And I can have a one-on-one conversation and assist with anything he needs help with. So this is taking simple functionality like messaging and applying it to a real-world scenario in the classroom where we can actually help that student and we can empower that teacher as well to use the technology in the classroom. We have digital lesson planning. So as a teacher, ahead of time when I'm doing my lesson planning, I might decide that tomorrow I have 3 lessons where I'd like to use iPad, I'd like to use technology, and I can go in ahead of time and I can choose which applications I would need for each lesson. So I can tailor the lesson to the applications needed. I can choose what restrictions I might want to put in place. As I mentioned earlier, perhaps in one lesson, I don't want them using the camera. Perhaps in another lesson, I do want them using a camera and I want them to actually do that as part of a project I've set for them. I can choose ahead of time which lessons can have which restrictions. We can also choose which websites they're allowed to use within that lesson as well. So having this ability ahead of time to plan for your lessons and actually build and tailor the technology to that lesson plan. What I'd like to do now is just walk through kind of my top 5 features of the teacher app and hopefully tie it into the classroom to show how I think it can help with teachers managing those devices. So I'd like to start with app request. When I was a teacher, again, going back about 5 or so years when I was training as a teacher in the UK, if I wanted an application for the iPads, I literally had to walk to the other side of the school, which meant going in and out of about 3 different buildings to find the IT department. And on the IT department door was a piece of paper that said, what apps would you like? Write them here. I literally had to walk to the other side of the school, write an app on a door and hope that someone would see it. Using Jamf Teacher, we've made this experience better for teachers and hopefully better for the IT team that has to get the apps for them. And this is how we do it. This is a teacher device. They can launch the App Store and they can look for the app that they need. And in this example, it's Math Learner. Then they can use a button they're hopefully familiar with, which is the Share button. This can then allow them to launch Jamf Teacher. They can choose the class that they need the app for and the students they would like to have the access to the application. They can then put in the reason why and why they need this application. And that is then sent off to the IT team who have access to Jamf School management system. They can then approve or deny that request. The teacher is able to actively monitor their request inside the teacher app. You see we have the app request section, and they can see whether that application request has been granted or not. So hopefully that's an example you can see of how we can improve the process of simply even just requesting an application to be used. The next feature I'd like to touch on is Ad-hoc Class. So I mentioned earlier how ahead of time a teacher during their lesson planning can decide what the iPads are going to look like in each lesson. Well, that's great if I know I've got 3 iPad lessons tomorrow, maybe 4 the day after that. But what if I have some iPads right now? I haven't had a chance to plan for this. I have some students, I have some iPads, and I'd like to run a lesson immediately. We have a feature called Ad-hoc Class. So with a teacher device on the left and the student device on the right, the teacher is able to launch the teacher app, select classes, and tap on New Class. They can create a class right inside the teacher app. This example is called Science. And then they can tap on Add Students to add them to the class. This turns the teacher device into a Bluetooth beacon. The student gets a pop-up notification, and they're able to then join the class. The teacher can then see all of the students once they join. And once they've joined the class, they can begin to manage those devices. The blue icons across the top allow them to manage all the devices. The orange icons allow them to manage an individual device. And they can then begin to choose which applications, what restrictions, and which websites, etc., the students are allowed to use in that class. The other great thing about this is this syncs back to the Jamf School management system, which syncs back to Apple School Manager. So what does that mean for me as a teacher? If I want to take those iPads and those students and run this class again, maybe tomorrow, next week, or next month, I don't have to remake the ad hoc class. As a teacher, it's always going to be available in that My Classes section if I'd like to rerun that class again. So we can pick up where we left off. The next feature I'd like to touch on is App Lock. So being able to lock into an app or a set of applications. Again, we have the teacher device on the left and we have the student device on the right. The teacher is able to select the device and they can go to App Lock. Inside that white square, if they tap, they get a list of all of the applications available. And the teacher can select one, or they can select, in this example, multiple applications to restrict the device to. They also have the ability to have this clear after an automatic time. The teacher can manually clear this restriction and bring back all of the apps, or you can set an automatic timer. And as you can see, the student device on the right-hand side is now restricted to just the apps that have been selected for the next period or lesson. We do have the ability to lock into a single app where the student isn't able to get out of that app, which is quite familiarly known as guided access. But we can also have this ability to select multiple applications and just show those. And that's a feature that is unique to Jamf Teacher. The next example I'd like to give is the attention feature. Having the ability to have the class pay attention to you for a moment. When I was a teacher and I had students with 30 iPads in the class, if I wanted them to stop, look up and listen to me for a moment, I literally had to ask them to take the iPad, turn it upside down and put it on the desk in front of them. This was the only way I knew that they weren't still using the device. And as always, you'd have a row of kids on the back of the classroom who would still be trying to use the device when I wasn't looking. The attention feature allows us to manage that behavior better in the classroom and allows the teacher to retain control of the devices. So with the teacher device on the left and the student device on the right, the teacher is able to go into the teacher app. They can select the class that they're in. They can choose the blue icons across the top to manage all devices, or they can use the individual device orange icons. And then they can go into the attention feature. They can put inside a customized message. And in this example, it's just eyes up. I want the students to look at me. Again, we have this ability to have an automatic clearing time, or I can manually clear it as a teacher. Teacher selects done, and the student device on the right is then put into a locked mode where they can't use the device. So as a teacher, I can be sure that no one's using a device. They have to look up, they have to listen to me for a moment before they can carry on with the task. And as you can see, the teacher can come in and manually clear that restriction if they don't want to wait for the timer. The last feature on the teacher app I want to show is the Weblock. So the ability to guide students to a website or a set of websites. Again, we have the teacher device on the left and the student device on the right. The teacher can go into the teacher app and they can load up the class. And in this example, we're now going to use the Weblock feature. What the teacher can do is specify a URL. And in this example, we're just going to use jamf.com/education. Again, we have this automatic clearing time, so the teacher can set the clearance of this restriction. We can add more if we want to. I'm just putting in this single example. And you'll see on the right, the student device is going to launch into Safari. The student is not able to go anywhere like google.com, but in the favorites bar at the top, they can see jamf.com/education. They select this, they're able to go to this website. And even more than that, they can actually navigate around the jamf.com domain. They can select other options within that website. So I'm not locking them to a specific URL. I'm locking them to the domain. This is especially useful if you're doing like a research project. I'd often ask students to maybe go to a news website and do some research. I don't have to give every single specific URL where they will find the information they need to do the project. I can just lock them to the domain, and they can then actually navigate around that domain and do some research to find the information for themselves. So we can do domain lock, which is again a feature that is unique to Jamf Teacher, and we can specify multiple domains here. So those are kind of my top features of the Teacher app, I suppose, and how I think they can be of benefit to a teacher in the classroom managing those devices. Something that does come up quite often is these are great features. I'd like to use them, but what if I don't have an iOS device? What if the budgets are available for the students to be able to use iPad, but as a teacher, I don't have an iOS device? We do have it available in a teacher web portal. So this is accessible from any device with a web browser. It looks a bit like this. The teacher can go in, they can select their school, they can log in with their account that the IT team have given them, and in there they should be able to see their classes and have all the ability that they would have in the Teacher app, except for Ad-hoc Class. Ad-hoc Class requires Bluetooth. It makes the device into a Bluetooth beacon. So Ad-hoc Class is not possible, but everything else you've seen is possible. The really great part about this is actually that it works over the internet. Apart from Ad-hoc Class, all the features you've seen work with an internet connection. So in a remote learning environment, you're still able to take advantage of all of these features and functionality. As a teacher, if I'm doing a lesson or a class which is being done over a VC, a video conferencing system, and I have students joining, I can actually manage their devices while they're at home and we're in a remote learning environment. I can choose what apps they can use. I can restrict the devices and have them pay attention to me. And you can use all of the features you saw except for Ad-hoc Class. You just have to make sure you set the class up ahead of time. I often get asked the difference between Jamf Teacher and the Classroom app from Apple. Apple has the Classroom app and we have our Jamf Teacher app. And the answer really is that they go hand in hand. They're very complementary to one another. Just as a high-level overview, that's maybe the differences between the two. With Classroom app, you can lock into a single app mode. With Jamf Teacher, we have that multi-app restriction possibility. With Classroom, you can guide a student to a website, but they can navigate away from that website. They can go anywhere they like, but you can guide them to it. With Jamf Teacher, we can actually lock into domains. Viewing student screens, so a teacher can see what is on the screen of the iPad, is possible using Apple Classroom. It's not actually there with Jamf Teacher, but we do have messaging functionality. So when I'm asked which app is best for a teacher, the answer is both. If you deploy both apps to a teacher's iPad, they both talk to Jamf School. And so when they launch either app, they'll see their lessons in there. So depending on the features or functionality needed by a teacher in that lesson, they can choose which app they need. Perhaps in one lesson, I could do actually using the Classroom app because I want to view the students' iPad screens. But the next lesson, I just need to do some locking into the websites. I could possibly use the Classroom app in the first example, and then the next lesson switch to using Jamf Teacher. When I launch each app, I see the same classes available. I'd like to switch now to look at the student application. So hand in hand with the Jamf Teacher application, we have the Jamf Student application. And this really is aimed at trying to involve the student more in the device and in their learning, giving them a bit more control over their device and making them feel invested in the technology they're using. Simply, this is how it looks on the right-hand side. There's actually been an update recently, so it has changed slightly, but it's broadly the same as this. That orange square that you're seeing allows a student to actually see their device, see what model it is, and access information regarding the hardware specifically. But also when they tap into it, it's actually a self-service portal. So if there are apps, maybe some books, maybe PDFs, maybe some settings that are available to students, but they're not pushed out automatically by the IT department. A student can go into that orange square and see what other resources are available for them to choose and download. The blue square gives the student the ability to perform updates to iOS, for example. A lot of times I'm asked, why would we want a student to do that? Well, there are great use cases for this. Maybe as a teacher, I don't want my students having the excuse they weren't able to do the project or they weren't able to be on task because there was an app that was updating. We can restrict the update during the lesson time, and we can then inform the student to update an app or update iOS once they're outside of the lesson. This way we can ensure that there's no updates happening during the time where they specifically should be using the device for learning. The green square allows them to have that messaging feature with the teacher. Comes up quite often. No, the students can't message one another. They can only message with the teacher. The second thing is the teacher can actually choose and enable whether the student can reply to a message or not. So perhaps as a teacher, I just want to tell them something and I don't want to read a reply. I can prevent them from replying to me. And all of these messages are kept logged securely. And that's an overview of the student application. What I'd like to do now is just quickly look at what we're doing for parents. Quite often we found, and we had a lot of examples where parents wanted to have some of this ability that the teachers had inside the lesson, but at home. So we have the Jamf Parents app that works with the other two as well. This just gives you an example of what it looks like. The parent is actually able to set locations. These are geofence locations, so you can set either where the school is or where the home is. And the parent is then able to restrict the device based off a geolocation. We have motion available. This came from the Netherlands, where schools were finding that students were trying to use the device while cycling to school. It's very good of them to be able to multitask. But you can actually, as a parent, restrict your child's device while they're in transit to or from school. So if they're walking, running, or cycling to or from school. And we also have day and time restrictions where they can set homework time and they can actually apply restrictions or restrict apps based on the time of day. So whether it's homework time or not. Quite often I get asked how this interacts with the teacher app. So if a student is going into school and there's still restrictions applying from the parent app when they're at school, we have the ability to manually clear those, but it's also based off a time schedule. So the IT department can set a time of day where the parent is actually able to use the parent app. So perhaps during the school hours, maybe 9 till 3, 3:30, 4, whatever the school day looks like, the parent app won't actually be able to perform any tasks on the student device. But after school hours, the parent is then enabled to be able to manage that device a little bit if they want. How is this set up? It's very simple for a parent. It's done through a QR code pairing process. If we have a student iPad on the left and the parent iPhone on the right, the student simply brings up a QR code inside the student app. The parent inside the parent app is able to scan that QR code. And as you can see, it links the child to that parent. Once that link has happened, the parent can select their child's device. They can begin to restrict based on app category, which is very unique to Jamf as well. So if an app is characterized as social media inside the iOS App Store, it'll restrict all those apps, or they can turn off specific apps if they want to. Maybe as a parent, there's a lot of social media apps out there and I'm not keeping up to date with which ones and what names there are. You can just restrict based off the app category. So this is the way that we're taking MDM and we're trying to give a bit of that ability to the parents as well to be able to manage during homework hours. And again, I get the question come up quite a lot. What if you're a parent and you don't have an iOS device, you don't have an iPad, maybe you don't have an iPhone, maybe you're using some other kind of technology. We do have a parent web portal, similar to the teacher web portal. So any device with a web browser is able to go in and they can select the school and they can sign in with an account that's been given to them by the IT department. And they should hopefully see their child and be able to manage their child's device with the same features and functionality they have in the parent application. For the sharp-eyed of you, you may notice the URL for this. It's still using an older URL. We're going to go through a refresh later this year where the URLs for the teacher and the parent app will be updated. But this is another way that parents are able to manage their student devices at home. And in a remote learning environment, this is especially great. And as part of that, we've actually had an initiative with Jamf School. We've been releasing features given the current climate that we're in with remote learning. And we've actually pushed out some features specifically for teachers, parents, and students. So beginning with the parent feature that we pushed out recently, it's actually bringing a watchOS app. So for those parents with an Apple Watch, they're actually able to manage their student device using the Apple Watch. This is the first watch application we developed, but actually this shows how we work hand in hand with Apple. So for 18 years, we've been with Apple very closely, and we're developing solutions using the Apple technology that can really help these people. The feature that we've added actually recently to the student application is something called Raise Hand. So we have this Raise Hand feature that we've added. This is the new look of the student application. How does Raise Hand work? Well, as a student, if I'm working at home, I'm maybe doing a homework task, and I'm stuck, I'm struggling, I could do with some assistance. I can tap on the Raise Hand feature. That brings up a list of teachers that I have available to message with, and I can tap on the teacher's name. The teacher just gets a pop-up notification saying this student needs some assistance. That's really all it does. So the student gets a list of teachers. They can select the teacher they want, and the teacher gets a notification, a pop-up notification saying there's a student that is trying to get your attention because they're stuck on a task. It's then up to the teacher how they then communicate with that student. They could email them, they could have a video conferencing call, they could use the green messaging square feature if they're using that inside the teacher app and actually message with the student directly. It's up to the teacher then to decide how they need to help that student. But it's a really quick way in a remote learning environment for a student to be able to get the attention of a teacher and just let them know that they need some assistance. The final one is the help guides. So inside the Teach app, we've got this blue square now, which we've added with a whole bunch of really useful resources for teachers. Great help guides on how to use the Teacher app and how to leverage this in the classroom, and how to walk through some of the features that I've spoken about already today. So those are new features that we added in the last couple of weeks, in the last few weeks, because of the climate that we're currently in. That's the great thing about Jamf Teacher is that we're always, and Jamf School, sorry, is that we have a fast release cycle and we're able to get products, feature requests into the product very quickly based on feedback that we get from schools. The last thing I'd like to point you towards before I conclude the webinar is actually a customer testimonial. If you go to that URL, jamf.it/remote-learning, you can actually read about a customer testimonial. It's a US example, but it's a school in the US that actually used Jamf to be able to switch to a remote learning environment literally overnight, and all of their students were able to still participate and continue with their devices from home. So it's a really lovely example of how we've helped with that. That's everything I have for you today. It's a quick run through of the applications and how we're actually taking the MDM solution, Jamf School, traditionally seen as an IT tool, and actually trying to take MDM and put it in the hands of the other stakeholders. If you do have any questions, we're going to take a look now, I believe, for the Q&A. I believe due to the audio issue experience at the beginning, there might be a relaunch of the webinar. So just for those of you, if it does relaunch, you might suddenly see maybe about 10 or 15 seconds while this webinar just quickly relaunches, and then we'll be able to start going through the questions.
Hello, Nick, can you hear me?
Hi, yes, Gary. Hopefully everyone else is also able to hear us now.
Okay, so I might as well go on camera and just say hello to everyone. I do apologise about the technical issues we had. Me and Nick were testing beforehand and everything was working fine. And unfortunately, we had some issues along the way. But thank you to Nick. Really appreciate that. Some really good information there. Just a quick introduction to the attendees as well that are still here with us. I am Gary Collins and I am the technical lead MDM consultant for academia. And what I wanted to say beforehand was if there's any questions that you guys have, I'm going to pop my email address in the chat now. And any questions you have for Nick, please just pile them in there and I've realised that some of them have probably gone now because we've had to restart the webinar in a new window. So please just pop them in the chat, and hopefully Nick will be able to answer your questions for you. Nick, I don't know if you want to put the screen back up, because otherwise they're going to have to be looking at me for a while. Which is
absolutely, more than happy to. More than happy to. Let me just put that back up for you.
There we go. Perfect. Yeah. So everyone, if you have any questions, please do pop them in the chat box. I'm just going to put my email address in there as well. Okay. We'll give it a few more minutes, I guess, then, and if anyone does have any questions,
absolutely. I'm very used to awkward silences, so I'm happy to hold on as long as people need.
I can do that. There were a few in there from beforehand, so I do apologise for any of the ones that did get removed. But yes, as again, please do pop them in the chat if chat's working for you guys. There we go. Are all the messages saved and accessible for review for safeguarding?
Absolutely, yes. This does come up quite a lot. Actually, there's certain states in the US where this feature isn't used yet, purely because they have slightly stricter rules. They vary from state to state in the US, but we're hoping to satisfy the criteria for a few of those US states. But yes, they are saved. The messages, the teacher can't remove them. They're logged, so it meets those requirements. But it is an optional feature as well. It's something that you can disable or enable. So as an IT administrator, I can disable that option, so the teachers aren't able to do that if that's the kind of policy the school would prefer to run with.
Excellent. Cool. I'll leave it a few more minutes. I mean, we do have 22 people still in here, so please, or if the chat is not working, I mean, I assume it is, but if it's not, then reach out to my email address if you can see that. Let me know if that's not working as well. Any feedback would be really appreciated. I might as well check mine now in case. Okay, cool. So we do have another one that's come through. So if your organization already has Jamf Pro, can they also use Jamf School alongside?
That's a great question. I often get asked the kind of differences between the two and which way we should go. If you're already using Jamf Pro, then there is a lot of these, some of these features available. So for example, the parent app, there is a parent app for Jamf Pro. Right now, there isn't a teacher application for Jamf Pro, but the good news is that plans to ship later this year. So we are actively developing the teacher app for Jamf Pro as well. If you would like to have both solutions, Jamf School and Jamf Pro running alongside each other, you can absolutely do that as well. The main thing to remember here is that a device can only be managed by one MDM server at a time. So either the device is going to be managed by Jamf Pro or it will be managed by Jamf School. In order to switch them, it's not a seamless process. You do have to remove the management from one and then enroll it into the other management server. So if you are going to run them concurrently side by side, just those considerations to be aware of. But you can talk to the guys at Academia. They're in a great position to kind of explain the process there. The other thing I'd say, we do have schools doing this. Sometimes schools stick with Jamf Pro when it comes to Mac OS if they have a big Mac OS estate. Maybe they're doing some lab environments with Macs and they have workflows there that aren't possible in Jamf School, and they use Jamf School for the iOS device. Jamf School can do Mac OS, just not quite to the same level as Jamf Pro. So it really depends what devices you have and also what you're doing with them as to which one you would go with. So hopefully that helps to answer. If there are kind of follow-up on that, please, you can either reach out to myself or Gary to get a bit more information. But I suppose that's a long way of saying yes.
Excellent, thank you. I've got another one through on email, which I shall read out to you. The features are using iOS devices. Is there a solution to do similar on iMacs? I think you kind of answered that question just now.
A little bit, yeah. I mean, the Classroom app from Apple is actually available on Mac as well as iOS, but it's really predominantly used at managing iOS in that way. If you want to manage the actual Macs, yeah, you would actually use the Jamf School console or the Jamf Pro console to manage those devices. Yeah, it's slightly different the way that Mac OS is constructed. It's a bit different from iOS, which is a what we call a sandbox environment. So it's not quite the same way. Yeah, there's no iOS app I can use to manage those Mac OS devices yet. Hopefully, maybe in the future that might change. Mac OS is becoming more and more like iOS. Things like supervision are now possible on a Mac OS device. So there is kind of a bit of movement to make Mac OS a little bit like iOS in that sense. But yeah, currently no. The best thing to do would be to log into the console either through a web browser or maybe putting a web clip on an iOS device. If I have an iPad, I can load it. I have that on mine. I have a web clip that takes me straight into the Jamf School console itself.
Excellent. Nick, I actually have a question for you as well, really.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was wondering, is for the student apps, what about in a shared environment? How does it work differently between is this kind of built for the one-to-one student with the teacher?
Yeah, it's primarily built for the one-to-one student deployment. So that's where we see the best uptake of it. When the student launches the student app, it will require them to log in. So in a shared environment, if you have the student app on the device, it's going to require them to do a login process. If it's a one-to-one environment and the student app's deployed to my device and the device is listed as mine inside Jamf School, it won't ask me to log in. The app already knows the device belongs to me, and it'll automatically just open up with my name and everything already in it. So in a one-to-one environment, it's very smooth, it's very slick. In a shared environment, you do have an authentication for the student in the student app. But typically on a shared device, we'd probably manage it slightly differently because the student app is really more of a kind of one-to-one kind of experience. But there are some features and functionality that cross over, but it's yeah, shared iPad. We do usually do it in a slightly different way.
Excellent. Yeah, I wanted to clarify that for people as well because it's either a split decision of going one-to-one or shared iPads throughout schools. So excellent. Yeah, that's brilliant. Well, we have another one. Is there a classroom teacher control for Mac OS?
Is that similar to the previous question? Maybe I'm missing the mark there slightly. We don't actually have the Teach app for Mac. For Mac, you would go through the web browser, and do it that way. But in terms of actually having like a teacher application to manage Mac, no, the teacher application manages iOS at the moment. And that's just the nature of the kind of beast we're dealing with. iOS, as I said, is sandbox, whereas macOS has a bit more intricacy. So right now it's logging into the Jamf School console to do the management. But maybe in the future we'll be able to bring kind of more lightweight version of an application to macOS that would allow a teacher to do some macOS management. But that's macOS is moving that way, as I say, with things like supervision and these kind of features from iOS, and macOS is shaping a little bit towards it. We might see that in the future, but that's kind of on Apple to make that available to us.
Yep, I think currently for the moment, probably classrooms for macOS, which is the best way to have that classroom environment.
Exactly, yeah.
Working.
And that talks back to Jamf School. So when they load up the Apple macOS Classroom app, that'll talk to Jamf School, and they can see all of their classes in there as well.
Excellent. Cool. We'll just wait and see if anything else comes through. If not,
no worries. As I say, I love awkward silence. You've got to wait the magical 7 seconds, I think, isn't it? Yeah.
If not, we'll play our lovely outro music, and thank yous to everyone who has joined today. I think I'm going to go ahead and play it. The chat will still be open, but if you do have any more, please pop them in, and hopefully you can hear us over the music anyway. But once again, thanks, Nick, for everything today. Really appreciate it, and thank you to everyone who has joined and watched the webinar. So thanks a lot.